nobody ever came to the sands of Egypt with a clear idea of what they were truly searching for. For 2,000 years, we have been told a single story. Cleopatra was the most beautiful woman in history, a living goddess whose looks spanned empires, and broke the will of Rome. But new DNA analysis, forensic reconstruction, and medical history suggest a far more disturbing alternative. The last pharaoh may not have been a beauty queen at all. She may have been a genetic time bomb. What the science now hints at is terrifying. Cleopatra's greatest battle may not have been against Octavian or the Roman legions, but against her own biology. And here's the catch: the clues have been hiding in plain sight for 2 millennia. You just have to know where to look. For over 2,000 years, the sands of Egypt have guarded one specific secret: the final resting place of Cleopatra VII, the last pharaoh of Egypt. Most historians will tell you she is gone forever. Buried beneath modern Alexandria, swallowed by earthquakes, rising seas, and centuries of urban sprawl. But for the last 20 years, one woman has refused to accept that answer. Her name is Kathleen Martinez, a criminal defense lawyer turned archaeologist from the Dominican Republic, and she did not approach Cleopatra like a romantic legend. She approached her like a cold case. Martinez treated Cleopatra's disappearance as a crime scene, assuming intention, misdirection, and motive. While everyone else searched where tradition told them to look, Martinez followed the psychological profile of a queen who knew Rome would never forgive her. That profile led her 30 miles west of Alexandria to a forgotten temple in ruins, Talktella Magna. In 2022, the ground beneath that temple finally spoke. Martinez and her team uncovered something that should not exist at a minor religious site: a massive tunnel carved through solid bedrock, stretching over 4,300 feet, nearly a mile long, 6 feet high, submerged in mud and seawater and running directly toward the Mediterranean. The structure stunned engineers and archaeologists alike. Experts immediately compared it to the legendary Tunnel of Epolinos in Greece, one of the greatest engineering feats of the ancient world. This was not the work of local priests or regional elites. You do not carve a mile-long subterranean passage 40 feet underground unless something of enormous importance lies at the end. Nearby discoveries of a submerged port reinforce the implication. This was once a strategic, sacred hub. Martinez believes this tunnel is not random. It is deliberate. It may be the front door to Cleopatra's final sanctuary. Her theory is chilling in its simplicity. Cleopatra did not fear death, she feared humiliation. She feared being dragged through Roman chains, paraded as a trophy by Octavian. She wanted to be buried with Mark Antony, beyond Rome's reach. Immortalized as the living incarnation of the goddess Isis. To do that, she needed a tomb that could never be defiled. A tomb hidden not by obscurity, but by audacity. Martinez believes Cleopatra buried herself where no Roman would ever think to look, and that Talktella Magna may guard the threshold to that underworld. While the queen herself has not yet been found, what has been uncovered inside the complex has already changed everything. Inside 16 rock-cut tombs at the site, archaeologists discovered mummies unlike any others. When they examined the skulls, they saw gold glinting in the darkness. Inside the mouths of the dead, where tongues should have been, were delicate amulets made of gold foil. In ancient Egyptian belief, the dead had to speak before Osiris, lord of the underworld, to justify their souls. A golden tongue granted the power of divine speech, golden eloquence. These were not random burials. These individuals were prepared for a royal arrival. Martinez believes they were Cleopatra's inner circle, courtiers equipped to announce their queen to the gods. This was not a cemetery. It was a waiting room, a necropolis designed for royalty. If her followers were buried here, then the queen herself was meant to follow. Yet, while the tunnel remained sealed, scientists believe they already had a shortcut to Cleopatra's DNA. To see the queen's face, they thought they only needed to examine the bones of the sister she eliminated, Arsinoe IV. Cleopatra's family was a blood-soaked minefield of betrayal, and Arsinoe was her greatest threat. When Cleopatra was exiled, Arsinoe took the throne. When Julius Caesar arrived, Arsinoe led the resistance and nearly trapped him inside the palace. Eventually captured, she was dragged through Rome in chains, a teenage girl whose humiliation moved the crowd to tears. That sympathy saved her life temporarily. Exiled to the temple of Artemis in Ephesus, she believed herself protected by sacred ground. She was wrong. In 41 BCE, Cleopatra convinced Mark Antony to have her murdered on the temple steps, an act that shocked the ancient world. For centuries, Arsanu's remains were thought lost, until archaeologists uncovered a mysterious tomb in Ephesus known as the Octagon. Inside lay the skeleton of a young person. The location fit, the timeline fit, the age seemed right. If this was Arsanu, then scientists finally had access to Cleopatra's genetic mirror. Questions about her ancestry, health, and appearance could finally be answered. But science has a way of destroying convenient stories. Early DNA tests failed due to contamination. But in 2022, researchers from the University of Vienna rediscovered the skull in archival storage. Using micro-CT scans and drilling into the petrous temporal bone, the densest DNA-preserving structure in the human body, they extracted new genetic material. In January 2025, the results were published, and they were devastating. The skeleton was not Arsanu. It was not female. It carried a Y chromosome. The individual was an adolescent boy, aged between 11 and 14, suffering from severe developmental disorders. His skull was asymmetrical, his jaw underdeveloped, his bones warped by disease. Genetic markers traced his ancestry not to Egypt, but to Italy or Sardinia. The tomb was not a princess's grave. It was a hero and a monument for a semi-divine figure. Why a deformed foreign boy was buried with such honor remains a mystery. But one thing was clear: the supposed DNA proof of Cleopatra's African lineage from this tomb was an illusion born of bad science and wishful thinking. That failure forces us back to the historical record, and the record tells a far darker story. Cleopatra was the product of the Ptolemaic dynasty, a Greek royal house that practiced extreme inbreeding to preserve power. Their family tree did not branch outward, it collapsed inward. Siblings married siblings, uncles married nieces. Historians believe Cleopatra's own parents were likely full siblings. Geneticists estimate her coefficient of inbreeding at over 45%, nearly double that of Charles II of Spain, the infamous bewitched Habsburg whose dynasty collapsed under the weight of genetic decay. Charles could barely walk, could not chew his food, and died with organs described as grotesquely malformed. Cleopatra, by comparison, should not have survived childhood, and yet she did. She was brilliant, multilingual, politically ruthless, and endlessly energetic. This creates a terrifying paradox. How could a woman born into such genetic collapse function at the highest level of power? Medical historians now suggest the answer may lie in inherited metabolic and autoimmune disorders that masquerade as genius. Cleopatra's relatives showed signs consistent with Graves' disease, a thyroid disorder that causes bulging eyes, swollen necks, manic energy, insomnia, and impulsive high-stakes behavior. Traits historians have long romanticized as charisma and brilliance may have been symptoms of a chronic hormonal storm. Cleopatra may have survived by becoming her own physician. Egypt was the pharmaceutical capital of the ancient world, and she had access to opium for pain, Kifi incense for sedation, and blue lotus for euphoria. She authored a cosmetic treatise not out of vanity, but necessity, using chemistry, makeup, jewelry, and clothing to conceal physical symptoms and project divine authority. She may have been history's first biohacker, waging a private war against her own DNA while ruling an empire in public. Which brings us back to the tunnel beneath Taposiris Magna. If Kathleen Martinez breaks through the final barrier, she may not uncover a flawless goddess, but a medical archive written in bone. Cleopatra may emerge not as a Hollywood fantasy, but as a survivor, a woman who ruled despite genetic catastrophe, who weaponized intellect, chemistry, and myth to transcend a failing body. Finding her tomb will not just rewrite history books, it may rewrite biology textbooks. And when that day comes, the real question will not be whether Cleopatra was beautiful or monstrous, but whether knowing the truth makes her legacy weaker or infinitely more powerful.